G'day people. Today we're going to do a MoP tier list based on the entire expansion, not just a tier 1 tier list. So most people when they pick a class, they sit there and they try and pick a class for the entire expansion. So that's what this is. This is going to help you make a more educated guess on what class to play going forwards. So what we're going to use as metric here is how good their damage is, how good their utility is, and are they good at all forms of content. We're going to exclude PvP from this tier list. It's more of a PvE tier list, but we're going to look at challenge mode and raid because some people want to do both. So we're going to look at PvE content as a whole. So there will be a little bit of a difference here or there, but realistically, this is more so to do with raids. We're also going to be looking at 25-man versus 10-man. I'll try and talk if there is a massive difference between these two for that spec. And we're going to be using logs as well as PTR testing that we've done currently, and I'll throw a bit of in the mix of those spicy servers that everyone likes to talk about, but you know we shouldn't really play. So without further ado, let's get into the tanks. So first off, we've got Blood Death Knight. Now Blood Death Knight in phase 1 is undisputably a god. It is the best damage tank by far. Sure, it loses out in challenge modes, but in a raid environment, it is crazy good. I wouldn't dispute that this is probably the strongest tank in phase 1 for main tanking capabilities, but what is lacking is the later phases capabilities. It doesn't scale as well as the other tanks on this list. There are a few it outclasses, but for that reason, I think that I'm going to have to drop it a tier. I think it's a good choice, but if you are picking this class to be the strongest tank for the most amount of time, I think that you're probably better picking one of these other tanks we're going to talk about. And for that reason, I think that Blood Death Knight sits in this tier and is probably not that overpowered compared to the other tanks on this list. So next off in this list is Warrior. So Warrior is really, really powerful in its utility that it brings to the raid. Not so much its damage in early phases, although it does become, I think, the second highest or highest damage tank in Siege of Orgrimmar. So for that reason, it scales really, really well into late game. In a 10-man raiding environment, it brings so much to the raid that I feel like this class is just really, really strong. I can't give it a better rating than Blood Death Knight, but I think that it's very high up there and is a very, very solid pick for going into MoP. We've got Brew Master. Now, I think that Brew Master is in God tier. Now, why? It has both the damage and the utility, and it's insane in challenge mode. This class just brings it all. It does it all. It's insane. It is by and far away the best tank you can pick if you're looking at the entire expansion as a whole. I think that this class is undisputed in its AoE damage. Like it's just the highest AoE damage, and that is really relevant in a tanking role. Not only that, you bring like insane amounts of damage reduction for the raid. You also not only do that, you have so much mobility, you can avoid mechanics with it. It's just, this class is insane in 10 and 25, man. There's just nothing that I can say that's bad about Brewmaster. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in God. Next tank on the list is Prot Pally. Now, Prot Pally is good, but it requires a lot of gear. It requires that haste to hit that breakpoint to do good damage. So in early phases, it's going to struggle. Like, it's going to be really, really struggle streets for Prot Pally early on. But it does bring probably probably the best externals for like single people. So it brings really good utility in that regard, and for that reason, I think that Prot Pally should be bought as an amazing off tank. Most of these other three tanks that we're looking at here really fill the role of a main tank position. Warrior, a little bit of an exception, it's pretty good at both, but Prot Pally is definitely that class that is made for that off tank role in 10 and 25. It's got a really solid DPS spec as well with all the buffs they've put in for Ret Paladin. And I just think that you can't go wrong starting with Prot. It might be maybe not here. It's either high great tier or like low best tier. When we're talking about its position, it's definitely on the weaker side compared to these two, but it's still pretty damn good. The next tank, not so lucky. So we're going to talk about Guardian Druid here. Now, Guardian Druid is really broken when we talk about Siege of Orgrimmar. Now, it is the highest damage tank. It's insane in the main tank role when it's given the opportunity to be that. Problem is, it suffers in the off tank role. It is garbage. Not only that, it's not that great when it comes to damage reduction. The only thing it has going for it is its damage. Not only that, it needs a lot of gear to make that work. So that means that in the later phases, I can see this being here, maybe in the best tank. But for the entire expansion, I think you will suffer for a long time before you get anything out of it. So for that reason, I think in 10 and 25, and it being the worst challenge mode tank, I can't, in good faith, recommend this class or spec to anyone. So I think you're better off playing any of these other tanks. The tanks are in a very good position. They are pretty balanced, especially after they nerfed the Blood DFA to come down to the level in the first patch. And with balance tuning and whatnot, maybe this does go up here, like with the other tanks in the line. But at this current point, and what we've seen in the past, I can't, in good faith, recommend it. So, without further ado, let's get into the healers. Okay, Resto Druid's great. Resto Druid in a raid environment is really good. It blankets the raid, but it does run into one issue. Its mana is not great. So it requires on blanketing the raid. This means that you need to have a pretty good grasp on when the damage is coming in, and it also lacks the it lacks the burst healing that it's needed in this expansion. There isn't a lot of time to top people from 0 to 100, so that means that you need to pre-ramp the damage, and then another class, like, say, a Resto Shaman's going to snipe it. It's going to snipe all the healing. There's probably nothing you can do about it. So, for that reason, I think it's better in 10-man, but not as good in 25. I think it could be a pretty strong healer in 10-man, but I think that there are better healers that you could pick. So, another class that is pretty similar to Resto Druid is Mistweaver. So Mistweaver suffers from nearly the exact same issue as Resto Druid, mana. It's also the exact same healing style as Resto Druid, unfortunately. So that it actually shares a lot of similarities in that it's very slow, a lot of ramp, it doesn't hit that like great healer status. So this means that you really need to be in a 10-man environment where you're healing less people, so you don't have to ramp as much, and it requires a fight that needs a lot of healing before you're going to be relevant. So next we have Holy Priest. Now Holy Priest is probably average, if not below average, when we talk about the entire expansion. It's never the best healer, but it's never the worst. I mean, it's sometimes the worst, I should say. But in saying that, with the power buffs that the other class has gotten, I definitely think that he probably is now the candidate for the worst healer. Now, that's unfortunate, and it is what it is, but at least you have another spec that is quite good. I would recommend playing that over Holy. The things Holy have going for it is very straightforward to play, very easy, does have that cheat death mechanic, and it does fit that niche if you don't want to play a proactive healer. I would recommend that you should play Discipline, but it is there. So with Discipline, I think this class is God tier. This class has seen nerfs in tier 1, but it is strong throughout the entire expansion. And it's because of one ability. The big shield that it gives to everyone on a 1.5 minute cooldown is ridiculous. It just shields the raid, and if you can see the damage patterns, shielding is better than healing. If you can prevent the damage, it's better. Because that means you're less healing less, that means you got less stress, you can avoid more damage. It means more deaths aren't going to happen in the first place. You're just gonna be able to muscle through a lot of this content with this healer. I think it's a must pick in 10 and 25. Class is really strong. Can't contend with that. Next, we've got Holy Paladin. Now, this is an interesting case here. Before the changes, I'd definitely put it down here in average, maybe even trash. But what they've done now is they've tried to fix up the healing. I think that it's arguably in great tier now. I think it's pretty good. I hope they don't revert the changes going forwards towards the end, but it now probably puts out more healing than any of the other healers. Maybe bar Shaman. Puts out more healing, and it also doesn't require the raid to be stacked, and it just goes hard. Like it does. I did a raid with a Holy Paladin, and he just didn't run out of mana with the new changes. I don't know if that will go live, but if it does, I can definitely see Holy Paladin, if it doesn't get changed over the course, like sitting here. Like, it's very strong, but it's not as strong as the other two healers. And I only want to put two healers in God tier. I know that's a bit of a spoiler going forwards, but it's not as strong as these other two classes we're going to talk, like, they're going to be in God tier. So without further ado, let's move on and talk about the other class that's in God tier, Enh Shamen. Now, Enh Shamen is insane. Healing Rain doing 60 to 65% of your healing for hitting one button and keeping it on the ground is beyond comprehension. Not only that, the utility is insane. They bring extra damage to the raid. It is a no-brainer to play Enh Shamen in Mr. Pandaria in PvE content. You should, and you should bring both of these healers in a 10-man scenario, Dispriest, Enh Shamen. You will never have a healing problem. It's just these classes work really well in unison. I don't think that the other healers are going to see play in 10-man environments. Unfortunately, if this comp stays the way it is, I can see a world where you might drop the Enh Shamen for a Holy Paladin if Holy Paladin stays as strong as it is on HPS throughput if the raid can't be stacked. So basically, that's the only scenario I can see Holy Paladin outclassing Enh Shamen. The other thing is, Enh Shamen doesn't really have good off specs when it comes to damage. Has Enhance. Enhance is okay, but it's still not Ret Paladin. Ret Paladin, surprise, surprise, is doing quite well at the moment. So that's another consideration for these top spots, is like, how well can you off spec, considering, you know, some of these fights are one healable. So at that point, you really need to like assess in a 10-man environment what healer is going DPS and how viable that is. So with that, we can get into the melee. All the healers are ranked. Let's get into the melee. We'll start with Frost DK. Now, I think Frost DK gets a bad rap. I think it's very strong in early phases, especially with these buffs that they've brought in. I think that Frost DK probably sits in the great tier here. It's great early and it does fall off later, but at the same time, I can definitely see that, you know, it can be, well, it is the best, like, it is the best DK spec by far. So you need to take that into consideration. It also uses one-handers. Now, like, that means that there's not other classes really that use strength one-handers. So you're going to be doing damage early on really, like, competitive because no one's really sharing your gear. Weapons are your biggest source of damage, so that's a huge selling point, especially in like a 10-man environment where gear is more scarce, etc, etc. So for that reason, I think that going from patch to patch to patch, I think Frost DK will be middle of the pack. It's going to be really strong early, and it's going to be probably middle of the pack in like tier 2, and then tier 3 it'll probably like taper off towards the end. But it's only because there's other classes that just scale insanely well. But with the way Blizzard's actively tuning, I can see Frost DK getting a little bit of a tuning knob here and there throughout the patches. So next we'll rank the other DK spec. I think that it is probably going to be good or average. It did get some changes. Not as much as buffs as Frost, but I think it is good to the point that you could play this spec over Frost if you wanted to on some fights, but I think that it does lose out. It's a lot harder to play than Frost, and I don't think it's as good. So I would also say that both of these DK specs suffer from another thing. They're not great in Mythic Plus. Well, shouldn't say Mythic Plus, sorry. In challenge mode. They are not great in challenge mode. That's because they don't bring much CC. Unfortunate, but CC is king in challenge mode. Also, their AoE damage is pretty lackluster. That's the same for this next thing on the list. But Feral, I think, is in a very strong spot. They got a huge buff for phase 1. That was going to be their weakest phase. But phase 2, they just go absolutely exponential with their snapshotting of their dots. If snapshotting doesn't change, Feral might be one of the top DPS in the melee category, period. So going forwards, I think Feral is a very strong contender. It's probably the strongest Druid spec that you can play out of all the Druid specs. So I think if you're going to play Druid, Feral is the pick. It's either Feral or Resto if you're going to pick out of the two. Now, in saying that, Balance is good because it's inherently ranged, and ranged is better than melee in a raid comp environment. So I think that if you're thinking about from that perspective, you could definitely make that argument. But I think Feral, it brings a lot of stuff to the raid. Unfortunately, in challenge mode, it doesn't bring CC, very much CC. It's got like Cyclone and a few other little things, but its CC is pretty lackluster. So for that reason, I think it's probably bottom of the best tier. But it's still a good class throughout the patches, especially with the buffs they put in the early phases here. That can't be said for Arms Warrior. Now, Arms Warrior is probably in great tier. Now, Arms Warrior is absolutely broken in phase 1 damage. Really, really, really good. Drops off significantly towards later phases. Its damage takes an absolutely cliff dive. If we look at going into Siege of Orgrimmar compared to all of the other DPS, just doesn't scale very well, but it's very good in early phases. It's not very good in challenge mode. Why? 0 CAC again. Unfortunate. Also, its AoE is pretty good. It's got very good cleave. like 1 to 2 targets, 3 targets even. Very, very good there. But I think Warriors will probably be swapping over to Fury in at least the end of Throne of Thunder when they're in full Beast, when they get to a certain crit threshold. And this will take them from being, you know, middle of the road DPS, early phases, like they get beat out by a lot of the ranged DPS, but later phases, Fury is just going to absolutely demolish. It is probably the top or second top DPS in the entire game. When we look at Throne of Thunder logs, it loses out to Warlock on a lot of other fights, but it's still crazy, crazy good when we're looking at damage just on a single target basis. Fury is going to be the king right at the end for melee. So that means that while it's very weak early on, you can play arms and then you'll transition to Fury later on. So Warrior as a whole, if you're planning on playing Warrior, I think it's a very, very good idea. It's strong. It's what I'm going to be playing. I recommend it. Next, we got Windwalker on this list for melee. Now, Windwalker is very hard to play. It's very hard to play. It does good damage, but Blizzard seems hesitant to buff it. So in the PTR, we saw a lot of changes to these other specs, but they didn't really want to change Windwalker too much. And for that reason, it really got left to the wayside on like how much damage it would do. It got a bit of a buff, like in its mastery affecting other abilities, etc., etc., but it just wasn't enough to push it to a point that I think it's really, really good. I think it's probably playable, but I don't think it's Brew Master's levels of good if you're playing a monk. So in that regard, I think that Windwalker probably sits down in the lower end of melee DPS you want to bring to your raid, unfortunately. It's also got some pretty good CC for challenge mode, but it's outclassed in the idea you don't want a class stack in challenge mode. Like, you really just want to bring like one of each to get more utility, like the utility that Brew brings, Windwalker brings, obviously. But the problem is you probably want a Brew Master to be tanking your run. So that means like you're more than likely not going to want to bring the Windwalker then, because then you're overlapping utility and probably shouldn't be doing that. So in saying that, I think that Windwalker is probably needs some love from Blizzard to move itself up in this tier list, but I think that you could definitely make an argument that it is a very fun spec to play. So I don't know. Should it move up? For being, you know, a fun spec, that's subjective. So I'm not gonna move it up just because of that. Ret Paladin. Now Ret Paladin before the buffs, probably around here. But after these buffs for phase 1, it's pretty fucking strong. It really shines in phase 1, and its utility is absolute to a raid is like absolutely mental. CC, really bad for challenge mode, so again, being on that melee side, I don't think that is going to be a top contender for challenge mode runs, but it is pretty good at raid. So I think that it is a strong contender, and you really want to bring at least one to a 25-man and possibly one in a 10-man just for the utility, and that's like hugely increased if you don't have a Prot Paladin as well. They've got a lot of utility in double sack, double hands, like all of this like damage reduction utility. They can put on tanks, they can put on healers, they can do all of these mechanics with bubble soaks. They have really, really, really good utility. I think that they're probably a slept on pick, but you know what's stopping them from moving up to the best tier here for me is their damage is in later phases is perceived to be a lot like worse, and if they revert the changes that have been given now, I can see them like fading off, and it might be a bit of a a shit show if we go further into the expansion, and I don't. Their placement is quite uncertain. In saying that, we've got Rogue. Now, Rogue, it's really, really strong later. Very, very strong. So, Assassination is really, really strong early. It doesn't taper off too badly towards the end. But what happens is the other Rogue specs outclass it, like, insanely well. So, Assassination's doing really, really well. I'm just going to talk about Rogue in general here for Assassination and Sub as the same spec because they play very, very similar. They also do very similar amounts of damage. Assassination outdoing Sub by a little margin, so we'll put it here, probably like this. But Sub doesn't get any better towards the end of the expansion. So this is like, it's time to shine. If you're on low gear, Sub's going to do more damage than Assass. But as soon as you, like, you know, you're somewhat getting some, like, pre-red beers, etc., etc., Assassination will overtake Sub and even surpass it. It will be the top rogue spec in Phase 1. Going into Phase 2, I can definitely see the third rogue spec coming up. But this doesn't mean it's bad. It just sort of, if we think about a graph, it's going to come up, and then it's sort of just going to level out as, like, it goes on. It's not really going to go exponential like some of these other specs, like combat. When it gets enough armor penetration, this thing's going to go off. But because it's so weak early phases, I can't say that I want to give it more of a rating than Assassination, because it's the complete opposite to what Assassination is. But that's good for the Rogue in general. That means you'll be playing Assassination earlier, and then you'll be switching to combat later. Combat is insane in Throne of Thunder. It's very, very good. Although it's not as strong as Warrior, it's still a very strong contender. And definitely worth bringing at least one to your raid, especially in like a 25-man environment where you can bring extra melee. In a 10-man environment, it's questionable to bring Rogue because they don't bring much utility, but their damage is quite good and they can do small niche things here and there. And, you know, they open your lockboxes, so if you want them for that, cool. Alright, so next I got Enhanced Shaman. Now, Enhanced Shaman's actually, its damage is quite strong. I think that it's actually a slept on pick. I think that Enhance is very strong damage-wise early, and it stays strong damage-wise the entire way through. A lot of people don't talk about Enhance being as strong as it is, but it didn't get much buffs from Blizzard when we were talking about the changes, and it was because it performed pretty well to begin with. So it's now getting outclassed in Phase 1 by a lot of these other melee specs that weren't going to do as well, like Feral Druid, Arms Warrior. Like before, Arms Warrior was going to do well, so was Enhanced Shaman, probably the two best melee specs, along with Rogue for melee. But now we're seeing that Ret Paladin and, you know, Feral Druid are like coming up the rear. They're very much on par with them, if not surpassing them. Now, also, in saying that, Enhance is very hard to play. Unfortunately, it's just how it is. But if you can play it at a high level, this class is insane and goes off. It's also got really, really strong utility because it just inherently being a shaman, it's very, very good. I think that it's a slept-on pick. I don't know if it's viable to bring one in a 10-man, but it's definitely worth bringing in a 25-man. This class does great damage when you can play it correctly. So that's probably where I'm sitting. So now we're getting into the range DPS. Range DPS are the kings of Mists of Pandaria and fill out the most errata raid spots. So this will be like a less competitive environment than what melee is. Now the melee spots are pretty hard to judge, like what's going to be absolute garbage, what's not. Like, you know, what are you bringing? you have to pick the cream of the crop because there's probably only 4 spots in a 25-man for melee, and probably only 2 spots for melee in a 10-man. So that is a lot smaller margin than like 4 slots in a 10-man for ranged, and for like 10 slots in a range for, 25. So let's get into Balence Druid here. So Balence Druid is an interesting case. It does okay damage. It's in phase 1. They just buff it to the point that it could be doing really good damage, but we didn't get to test with it. So it's interesting to know that we could be looking at Balence Druid being stronger than I'm placing it here. But it does scale insanely well towards the end, especially in multi-dot scenarios towards the end, like in Siege of Warcraft. So Balence Druid can pop off, but at the same time, it's not going to pop off in phase 1, in my opinion. And phase 2, it doesn't do too well. It sort of takes a dive, and then it comes back up in Siege of Warcraft. And for that reason, it's a very wax-wane type of like damage curve, and its utility is questionable. It's okay, but it's not great. So for that reason, I think there's other range specs that definitely outclass it, so I wouldn't recommend playing Balence Druid, but it is a range DPS at the end of the day, so it probably gets bought more than these other higher ranked melee DPSs to a raid, so let's keep that in mind. Next, we're talking about Survival Hunter. Now, Survival Hunter is probably here. Now, it's either in God tier or it's in best tier. Now, Survival Hunter is really, really good when we talk about phase 1. It absolutely goes absolutely hard in phase 1. It will do probably the highest damage, period. Out of any of the specs, I think it does the highest damage in PCR testing right now. Not only that, it scales pretty well into the later expansion, into the later patches, and is pretty easy to play. So in saying that, I think it's probably the cream of the crop of Hunter specs if this other spec didn't exist. Now, BM is crazy. BM is probably... I don't know what Blizzard was thinking when they did BM. BM is the best cleave spec in the game. It absolutely demolishes at the end game. And with the buffs they've made to the PTR, BM is on par, if not a little bit worse than Survival in phase 1. And it scales so much better than Survival does, even though Survival scales pretty well. So in saying that, I think that Blizzard has overtuned BM, and it probably won't sit here for the entire expansion. I definitely see them reverting some of these buffs, and it will probably more sit here or here. But at this current point, and how it is and how it was, it's in God tier for sure. That can't be said for the last Hunter spec we're going to talk about. Do not play this spec. It is the first spec that I will highly suggest is garbage. It is not very good. It does everything worse than both the other Hunter specs. It's just not good. It's not good in M+. It's not good in any of the environments. Like, do not play it. Alright, so Mage. Getting into Mage. Fire is really, really strong phase 2. But it's not that strong phase 1. So I think that you might play Fire phase 1, but it's interesting to know that the other mage, like Arcane, probably outclasses it in phase 1. But it doesn't mean that Fire's bad. Fire is probably the best range spec other than Hunter. damage wise in phase 1. Either that being fire or arcane or frost. Even frost is still pretty good in phase 1, but it's not consistent over all the patches. Fire, on the other hand, is very, very competitive phase 1. Still not the best mage spec phase 1, but it is the best mage spec phase 2, best mage spec phase 3, which means that in saying that, that makes it probably one of the most consistent range DPSs you could play, if other than the Hunter, if you are looking for a more of a caster playstyle going into Mists. So can't recommend Mage more than enough. So Fire's looking really good, very strong in challenge mode, great CC, good utility, great class. In 10 and 25, like you might even see two mages, 3 mages in 25 man, even 2 mages in 10 man, like really, really strong. Frost, as I said, it is strong phase 1, but I don't think it's strong after that point. It's more of a PvP spec. You can play this in challenge mode, and it does help a lot if you are struggling, if you tank struggling specifically. So in saying that, you could definitely go that route. Arcane, definitely the strongest spec in phase 1, but it also tapers off towards the end, and is not really that good when it comes towards the end of the expansion. So for that reason, I'll put it in great tier, because it's sort of same sort of deal with Armswear, right? It's good early, but tapers off, whereas Fire is strong early and still strong late. That's sort of where the differentials between these two categories is like, are they strong early? Are they strong late? And if the answer to yes is both, you know, that's where it's like your best and above. So next we got Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest is interesting. Shadow Priest was going to be pretty bad early on in early phases, but Blizzard decided in their right mind that they wanted Shadow Priest to be good. So Shadow Priest does a lot of damage now. I think that it's probably in the best tier. Why? Because it brings a lot of damage, and the things that it's good at, like split target cleave, lots of like multi-target dotting, there is a lot of fights in Mr. Pandaria that Shadow Priest will excel on. And if they keep their buffs going forward, like I suspect, I think Shadow Priest could be a contender for one of the best range specs, like, period. So, in saying that, also your gear is very, I don't know, your gear is very easy to be competitive with. Like, so everyone's going to be wanting your gear, but at the same time, if you can get that gear, you're going to do good damage. So if we're talking about that, it does lose a bit of value, but it is a very strong spec, and I think that you probably won't be unhappy playing this. I think it's definitely a strong contender for the range DPS. So in that case, we'll just put it there. We got Elemental Shaman. Now, unfortunately, Elemental Shaman falls to the wayside in Mr. Pandaria. It was pretty strong. Like, it was okay in Cataclysm, but it really doesn't shine here. It got really good mobility, which is funny to say, because you wouldn't think of mobility when you think of Elemental Shaman, but it is quite mobile. But its damage starts pretty low and ends up being pretty low. We're talking about the entire expansion. And for that reason, I just can't recommend this spec to anyone to play. It's got your utility, but at the end of the day, you know, it needs to be good in challenge mode as well. And in challenge mode, it's okay. Does bring Hex, a few other things. But realistically, Resto Shaman is the healer of choice for challenge mode at the end. So You probably end up playing that anyway if you were playing Elemental, if you're planning on doing challenge modes. So I think that Elemental as a spec, I don't recommend you trying to play. You might as well try and fit that Ele Shaman like niche better than doing Elemental. Next we've got the Kings. Last but not least, Warlock. Now Warlock is the strongest class in Mists of Pandaria, hands down. For that reason, I'm going to place both Affliction and Destruction in S tier. Destruction outshines Affliction in phase 1 and is still quite competitive. The second top damage all the way through to the end of Mists of Pandaria when it's talking about casters specifically. Affliction starts semi-decent, but with the new buffs, someone at Blizzard really wants to play this spec. They really want to play it. I don't know why, but they really want to play it, and they want to play it now. So they gave it buffs to where it is now competitive with every other spec and outshines every other caster other than Destruction Warlock. And it does really, really good damage on snapshots. If you can play this class, it is going to be absolutely broken. I couldn't highly recommend any other spec on this tier list other than Affliction. If you want to be the top damage in your raid, just play Affliction. You will top meters. You will be the damage dealer of your raid group. 10, 25. This class is stackable, has 2 different specs. If you don't want to play the dot hard playstyle, you've got the Destruction, which is a very easy spec. Just hit Chaos Bolt forehead and you will do insane amounts of damage. Can't go wrong with Warlock in Mists of Pandaria. Couldn't recommend it more. Unfortunately, Demonology was the best in Cataclysm, but we've now seen a huge drop. It still does okay damage, actually, in phase 1, and it's unironically, you could play it, and it is actually better than some of these other specs, especially, like, it's better than Balence Druid, right? That's what I mean, like, Balence Druid, yeah, it's better than Frost Mage, it's better than, fucking Elemental Shaman. It's better than these other specs. It's crazy to think that you've got these specs and they just can't beat Warlock's weakest spec. They just can't. They can't do it. So that's sort of where I think that the classes come down to on the list at this point, and what I have thought with when we're looking at current PCR testing and what we're looking at in later phases. I think this is a clear representation of where we will sit later in the choice you've made for your class. So yeah, thanks for listening. Don't subscribe, don't fucking hit the like button, and don't hit the bell. So I'll see you later, boys.